Most men are taught the wrong lesson about attraction. They're told to impress, to chase, to perform. And the more they try, the less respected they feel. Here's the quiet truth no one tells you. Attraction doesn't respond to effort. It responds to presence. The Stoics understood this long before modern psychology put words to it. Marcus Aurelius once reflected that a man's power comes not from controlling others, but from mastering himself. And that single idea changes everything about how you are perceived. Because the moment you stop trying to be attractive, you begin to become it. This video is not about tricks. It's not about manipulation, and it's definitely not about pretending to be someone you're not. It's about psychological principles grounded in Stoic wisdom that quietly shift how people respond to you when you embody calm, self-respect, and emotional discipline. And by the end, you won't need to convince anyone of your value. They'll feel it. Before we go further, if you're serious about becoming mentally stronger, calmer, and more grounded as a man, subscribe to this channel. This is where we build quiet power, not noise. Now let's begin. The first principle is this: attraction follows emotional safety. Most men think attraction is about excitement, but psychology and Stoicism say otherwise. People are drawn to those who regulate their emotions well, not because it's flashy, but because it feels safe. A man who reacts to everything, who explains himself constantly, who becomes defensive, anxious, or overly eager, signals instability. The Stoics warned against this centuries ago. Epictetus taught that if you let external events disturb your inner state, you hand your power away. Modern psychology agrees. When someone feels that your mood is steady, that your reactions are measured, they subconsciously trust you more. Not because you're silent, but because you're grounded. You don't rush to respond. You don't over-explain. You don't try to control outcomes. And that calm becomes magnetic. This doesn't mean being cold. It means being contained. A man who can sit with uncertainty without scrambling is rare, and rarity draws attention. The second principle builds on this. Detachment increases perceived value. This is one of the most misunderstood ideas online. Detachment is not indifference. It's not ignoring people, and it's definitely not pretending not to care. Detachment means your identity is not fused to the outcome. Marcus Aurelius wrote that we should never place our peace in the hands of others. When you do, you become dependent, and dependence is felt immediately. When a man's self-worth rises or falls based on attention, approval, or response, people feel pressure. But when a man enjoys connection without needing it, people feel curiosity. Psychologically, we value what doesn't cling, not because it's unavailable, but because it feels complete without us. That completeness is powerful. You don't announce it, you don't explain it, you embody it. Which brings us to the third principle. Silence shapes perception more than words. Most men talk too much when they're uncertain. They explain, they justify, they fill space. But Stoics believed silence was a form of discipline. Seneca warned that constant explanation weakens authority. Modern psychology confirms this. People who pause before speaking are perceived as more confident and emotionally intelligent. Silence creates space, and in that space, others project meaning. You don't need to dominate conversations. You don't need to impress. When you speak less, but with intention, your words carry more weight, and your presence becomes felt even when you say nothing. This is where attraction quietly forms, not through performance, but through control. Now here's something important. If this is already resonating with you, pause for a second, like the video. It helps this message reach men who need it, not noise, but clarity. Now let's go deeper. The fourth principle is subtle, but powerful. Self-respect sets the emotional frame. People don't treat you based on what you say you deserve. They treat you based on what you tolerate. Stoicism teaches boundaries without hostility. You don't argue, you don't threaten. You simply don't stay where you're disrespected. And when you do that consistently, calmly, people adjust. Psychologically, humans are incredibly sensitive to standards. If you abandon your standards to be liked, you lose respect. If you uphold them without drama, you gain it. This is not dominance, this is alignment. You act in accordance with your values, not reactions. And that steadiness is rare. Attraction grows where there is clarity. Now pause here. In the next part, we'll talk about why emotional restraint creates mystery, how neediness repels without you realizing it, and why the strongest men never chase validation. This is where most viewers drop off, and where those who stay change. So stay with me. There is a moment every man reaches, a quiet, uncomfortable moment, when he realizes that chasing attention has never actually brought him peace. You can feel it when you replay conversations in your head, when you wonder if you said the wrong thing, when you wait for replies, when you try to do more to be liked. This is the moment Stoicism calls the turning point. Marcus Aurelius warned that when your happiness depends on another person's reaction, you've handed your freedom away. And most men never get it back because they mistake effort for value. Here's the truth most won't tell you. Attraction does not grow when you try harder. It grows when you need less. And that idea scares people because it means letting go of control. This is where weak patterns break and real strength begins. Most men are taught to perform, be funnier, be nicer, be more impressive, be more available. But performance creates pressure, and pressure kills attraction. What actually creates deep interest is emotional gravity, the sense that you are grounded, complete, and unmoved by approval. Stoics called this autarkia, self-sufficiency. Not isolation, not arrogance, but inner completeness. When you stop trying to win attention, people begin to feel something rare around you, relief. Because you are not pulling, you are not pushing, you are not chasing an outcome. You are simply present. Here's the fourth psychological principle most men miss. People feel safest and most drawn to those who don't need them to feel whole. Neediness isn't always obvious. Sometimes it hides behind kindness, sometimes behind humor, sometimes behind constant availability. But emotionally, it feels the same. It feels heavy. When you release that weight, something shifts. Your voice slows, your reactions soften, your body language opens. You stop trying to get somewhere. And paradoxically, people come closer. This is where many viewers feel resistance. Because they ask, if I don't pursue, won't I lose my chance? Stoicism answers calmly. What leaves when you stop forcing it was never meant to stay. Real attraction is voluntary, not negotiated, not earned through exhaustion. When you accept that, your behavior changes without effort. The fifth principle is emotional containment. Most men leak emotion. They overshare too soon. They explain themselves. They react instantly. They fill silence. Stoics understood silence as power, not as a tactic, but as restraint. When you don't rush to explain your intentions, people project meaning onto you. When you don't immediately react, your presence feels solid. When you don't chase clarity, mystery forms naturally. This is not manipulation. It's discipline. You're no longer ruled by the urge to be understood, and that changes how you're perceived. Here's the emotional pivot, the moment most men feel uncomfortable. You must be willing to be misunderstood. Not cruel, not dismissive, just unmoved. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a man should act rightly and let others think what they will. This is where attraction deepens, because confidence without defense feels rare. Most men explain. Strong men stand. The sixth principle is direction. Attraction grows when your life is already moving forward. Not hypothetically, not someday, now. When you have purpose, people feel it. Not because you talk about it, but because your time has weight. Stoics believed that a man without direction becomes a servant to emotion, and emotion-driven men are predictable. Predictability kills intrigue. Direction doesn't mean being busy, it means being decided. You know what matters, you know what doesn't, and you move accordingly. That clarity is magnetic. Here's something important. This video is not about women. It's about who you become when you stop centering your worth on being wanted. Ironically, that's when desire appears, because people are drawn to those who already belong to themselves. If this part is resonating, pause for a moment. Ask yourself honestly, where am I trying too hard? Where am I explaining instead of standing? Where am I waiting for permission to be myself? That awareness alone begins the transformation. And if this is hitting something deep, like the video. It helps this message reach men who need it. The seventh principle is emotional steadiness. Not coldness, not indifference, but stability. Stoics trained themselves to remain composed whether praised or ignored. Why? Because emotional spikes signal dependency. When your mood doesn't rise and fall with attention, people feel grounded around you. They don't feel responsible for your state. And that creates space for genuine connection. This is subtle, but powerful. Finally, understand this. Attraction is not something you do to someone. It's something that emerges when you stop trying to extract validation from the world. When you become calm, centered, directed, whole. You don't chase, you don't manipulate, you don't perform, you allow. And what's real stays, what's not fades, and you remain intact. Now we'll go deeper into boundaries, selectivity, and why saying no changes everything. Stay with me. You're not becoming more attractive, you're becoming unshakable. There's a moment in every man's life when he realizes something uncomfortable. Trying harder doesn't make you more attractive. Explaining yourself doesn't make you more valued. Chasing doesn't make someone want you more. In fact, it does the opposite. Most men are taught that attraction comes from effort, from proving, from giving more, faster, louder. Stoic philosophy and modern psychology say something radically different. Attraction is not created by pursuit. It is created by absence, boundaries, and selectiveness. This is where most men fail, and where powerful men separate themselves from the rest. Marcus Aurelius wrote, in essence, that a man must never place his worth in another person's response, because the moment you do, you lose sovereignty over yourself. And here's the truth most people won't tell you. A man who does not need validation becomes magnetic, not because he manipulates, but because he is not available to everyone. Let's talk about boundaries. Boundaries are not walls, they are filters. They quietly say, this is who I am, this is what I tolerate, this is what I don't. Most men have no boundaries. They accept disrespect, they over-explain, they reply instantly, they rearrange their lives for attention, and then they wonder why they are overlooked. Psychology shows something brutal but real. People value what they can't easily access, not because of games, but because scarcity signals worth. When a man is selective with his time, energy, and attention, the world reads it as strength. Silence becomes confidence, distance becomes intrigue, calm becomes authority. This is not about being cold, it's about being grounded. A Stoic man does not rush, he does not chase emotional chaos, he does not abandon his purpose to be liked. He observes, he chooses, and that choice, that restraint, is what creates attraction. Here's something most men never consider. When you are always available, you communicate that your life has no structure. When you always agree, you communicate fear of loss. When you always pursue, you communicate need.
Need repels, not because women are cruel, but because need signals instability, and the mind instinctively moves away from instability. Stoicism teaches mastery of impulses, not suppression, mastery. The ability to pause before reacting, to respond instead of chase, to walk away instead of explain. That is power. And power, when calm, is deeply attractive. Selectiveness is the next layer. A man who chooses carefully sends a silent message. I don't need everyone. I choose what aligns. This is not arrogance. It is alignment.
When you stop trying to be liked by everyone, the right people feel it. Your standards become visible, your self-respect becomes obvious, your presence becomes heavier, slower, intentional. And here's where psychology aligns with Stoicism. People feel safer around someone who is not desperate for approval. Why? Because they trust his reactions, they trust his emotional stability, they trust his center. This is why boundaries don't reduce attraction, they focus it. A man with boundaries doesn't argue for attention. He doesn't negotiate respect. He doesn't explain his worth. He lets people meet him where he stands, or not at all. And paradoxically, this is where desire grows, because uncertainty awakens curiosity, because restraint creates tension, because calm signals depth. Think about it. The man who is always available is predictable. The man who is grounded is intriguing. The man who explains everything removes mystery. The man who acts with quiet consistency builds it. This is not a trick, it's a posture. Stoics believed that the highest form of strength is self-command, and when you command yourself, others feel it without you saying a word. Here's a simple shift that changes everything. Instead of asking, how do I get her to want me? Ask, does this align with who I am becoming? That question changes your posture, your tone, your timing, and people respond to posture more than words. When you are selective, you stop auditioning, you stop proving, you stop chasing outcomes, you become present. And presence is rare. This is why men who focus on their path, their work, their discipline, their growth become unintentionally attractive. They're not trying to impress. They're occupied with something larger than validation. And that's the paradox. The less you chase attention, the more attention finds you. Not obsession, not control, but genuine attraction rooted in respect. And respect lasts longer than excitement. In the next part, we'll talk about the final layer, how emotional discipline and consistency create long-term attraction without effort. But for now, remember this. Boundaries are not about pushing people away. They are about standing still and letting the right ones come closer. If this part resonates with you, pause for a moment. Ask yourself, where have I been giving too much access? And if this is helping you see things differently, like the video, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe, because mastery begins with awareness, and awareness is the first step to strength. At some point in a man's life, he realizes something uncomfortable. Chasing attention doesn't make him powerful. Trying to impress doesn't make him attractive, and forcing outcomes never leads to respect. This is where most men either grow or stay stuck. Because real attraction, the kind that lasts, is never created by tricks. It's created by who you become when no one is watching. The men who hold attention effortlessly aren't louder, they're calmer, they're grounded, they're selective, and most importantly, they don't need to be chosen to feel whole. This is the final shift, the moment where attraction stops being something you try to manufacture and becomes something that naturally forms around you. Let's talk about why. When a man is internally stable, people feel it before he speaks.
Not because he's perfect, but because he's not leaking need. He doesn't rush to reply. He doesn't over-explain himself. He doesn't chase validation through attention. His presence says one thing clearly: I am already complete. And paradoxically, that's what creates intrigue. Because obsession doesn't come from being impressed, it comes from not being able to read someone fully. Mystery is not silence for effect, it's silence born from self-sufficiency. When you stop performing, people lean in. Most men lose attraction the same way. They overinvest too early. They overcommunicate emotions they haven't earned yet. They try to secure outcomes instead of letting them unfold. This isn't love, it's anxiety. And anxiety repels. Not because feelings are bad, but because unregulated emotion feels like pressure. The Stoics warned against this centuries ago. They believed the man who cannot govern his impulses will always be governed by others. That includes emotional impulses, especially those.
Here's the uncomfortable truth most men never hear. You don't lose attraction because you're not good enough. You lose it because you abandon yourself too early. You stop living your life. You reorganize your priorities. You start measuring your worth by someone else's response. And the moment that happens, power shifts. Not intentionally, but energetically. Respect cannot survive where self-respect disappears. So what does a grounded man do differently? He doesn't rush intimacy. He allows connection to grow at its natural pace. He listens more than he speaks. He observes patterns instead of projecting fantasies. He doesn't attach meaning to every message or silence, because he understands something crucial. Interest that is real does not need to be chased, and if it fades when he stops chasing, it was never solid to begin with. That's not loss, that's clarity. This is where obsession, the healthy kind, actually forms. Not fixation, not dependency, but respectful fascination. People become drawn to men who are emotionally composed, don't seek validation, have direction beyond relationships, walk away from what disrespects them, not because they're cold, but because they're rooted. Roots create stability. Stability creates safety. Safety creates attraction. Now here's the final lesson. The strongest men don't try to be unforgettable. They live in a way that doesn't require remembering. They don't demand attention. They don't explain themselves endlessly. They don't negotiate their boundaries. They let their absence speak louder than their presence ever could. And if someone leaves, they don't chase. They don't beg. They don't spiral. They continue. Because they understand, anyone who is meant to stay will not need to be convinced. This mindset doesn't just change how others see you, it changes how you see yourself. You stop asking, "Am I enough?" and start asking, "Does this align with my standards?" That shift alone separates men who are constantly seeking from men who are quietly chosen. So if you take nothing else from this series, take this. Attraction is not created by manipulation. It is revealed by self-mastery. When you become calm under pressure, when you move with intention, when you respect your time, your energy, and your values, you don't need tricks. Your presence becomes the signal. If this video gave you clarity, like it. It helps this message reach men who need it. If something resonated, comment one insight you're applying immediately. And if you're building discipline, calm, and inner strength, subscribe. Because this channel isn't about shortcuts. It's about becoming the kind of man who never needs to chase respect, attention, or attraction again. Stay grounded, stay unshaken, stay stoic.